Welcome back to the Play by Play podcast YouTube channel, where we are back with the corner, the segment of the podcast where we talk everything within the combat sports world. And today we have a little bit of a fun little future prediction episode, I guess you would call it, where we are going to review the newly announced fight between Sebastian Fundora and Keith Thurman for the WBC Super Welterweight title on August 25th. And we will also be previewing a potential matchup between Keith Thurman and Errol Spence, the one of the biggest welterweight fights of this new era that never got to happen. And why that might be the best fight for both fighters going forward if Keith Thurman is able to get past Fundora. But before we get into all of that, I want to encourage you to go down below to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, comment on the video, as well as share with your friends. And if you haven't already, go ahead and follow us on all social medias, that being TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those ads are going to be down below. We're on all those. You will get to see my latest reaction to breaking news in the NBA, the NFL, and combat sports. And you will never miss from whenever the podcast decides to upload an episode. And without further ado, guys, let's not waste any more time. Let's get into the video. So we're back, and that's right. You heard it at the beginning of the video. Keith Thurman will be making a big-time return as he looks to become a two-division champion, as he has agreed to a deal with PBC to fight Sebastian Fundora on October 25th at the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. And this is a fight that has been in negotiations for the past month or two. It was confirmed that talks were just about done about a month ago, but they did not have an official date or venue. And now we are getting that fight. And not only that, but we are getting that fight pretty close. We are just about a month and a half away from that fight taking place. And for me, this is a really exciting fight, especially for a fan like myself who kind of grew up in that middle age between the transition of the older generation of welterweights like Oscar De La Hoya, Floyd Mayweather, and Manny Pacquiao, and then the new generation like Keith Thurman, Shawn Porter, Terrence Crawford, Errol Spence. The list goes on and on. To see Keith Thurman coming back and now contending for another title is very exciting, because he is a very exciting fighter, both inside the ring and outside the ring. He has incredible mic skills, and he is very skillful inside the ring as well. He has a lot of big-time powers, nicknames One Time with that one-time punch, that one-time right hand to get through. He has showcased a lot of big-time power throughout his career. A lot of great speed. He has been able to outbox and kind of outmaneuver some of the best welterweights in the world at that time. 3 years ago, he managed to outbox Mario Barrios, who is the current WBC welterweight champion. But he has a pretty tall order, and that is not, a joke or a pun right there with Sebastian Fundora, who is probably one of the most awkward matchups in the whole of boxing right now. Sitting at the 154-pound weight class and sitting up at 6 foot 6 inches tall. That is right. There's going to be nearly a foot of height difference between these two once they get in the ring, as Thurman stands at about 5'7", 5'8", so about an 11 to 10 inch height difference between the two. And that's going to be difficult for Thurman. He's going to, just previewing this fight alone, he's going to have to really show that he can work inside, that he can do a lot of tremendous body work to Fundora, because that is what is going to be open for him once he gets inside. And for Fundora, he has to do what he always do, which is to kind of be that sniper in the back, utilize his jab and come across with the straight left hands and the straight rights right down the pipe. He did that incredibly in the fight against Tim Tszyu on the undercard of Mario Barrios versus Manny Pacquiao. He absolutely outclassed Tim Tszyu, who Thurman was originally expected to fight before he came with an injury, and Fundora ended up stepping in. That was supposed to be Thurman's fight to go ahead on. Fundora has been one of the biggest issues for these super welterweights, just because of that size alone. It is really difficult to get inside. As far as who I'd favor in this fight so far, I definitely would favor Fundora. He's been a little bit more active than Thurman just throughout the past couple of years. This is Thurman's second fight in 6 years. Ever since that loss against Manny Pacquiao back in 2019, he has only fought Mario Barrios in 2022, and then recently, in the beginning of the year, he fought Brock Jarvis, who is nowhere near the high contendership of the 154-pound division. He absolutely sliced through Jarvis with a third-round TKO and whatnot. But so Fundora, definitely the much more active, a lot younger than Thurman, has the height advantage. This is definitely going to be a big-time uphill battle for Thurman. But if he can utilize his power with also some new 154-pound strength, we can't we can't let that just go by. Having 7 extra pounds is definitely going to add big time to that huge amount of power that Thurman already has. And like I said, this dude is capable of putting on some tremendous fights. I mean, his fight with Sean Porter all the way back in, was it like 2016, 2017? That's one of my favorite fights in this new era of welterweights that I love. Go back and watch that fight between Keith Thurman and Sean Porter. It was an absolute war, and Thurman was able to land some very devastating right hands within that fight and just purely outclass Sean Porter by the end of that fight. But speaking of this new era of welterweights, that kind of leads me into the bigger point of this video, which is this new era of welterweights is coming. Their days are numbered, right? Sean Porter's already retired. You have Terrence Crawford in a big time fight with Canelo Alvarez in about 2 weeks' time. Keith Thurman right now is about 38 years old, and the man that I want to put him against in this episode is going to be Errol Spence, who is on his last leg as well after his devastating loss to Terrence Crawford 2 years ago. It has now been 2 full years since we've seen that man in the ring, and he now, I just looked it up, sits at 35 years of age. And with him being more inactive, it seems more and more that we're getting to the end for these welterweights. And I think that this is one of the biggest fights that never got to happen when it came to this new era of welterweights. There were so many times when these two were able to come to the table, but negotiations just continued to fall through. I remember Spence going on First Take and talking about making this fight happen back in around 2016, 2017. Negotiations ended up falling through. There was then a mandatory challenge. I believe that was after Spence beat Ugas for that WBC title. The WBC ordered Spence to give Thurman the title shot. Those negotiations fell through, and after that, Spence pretty much was done, right? He did not want to give Thurman any more opportunity to go ahead and go against him, because he also felt that Thurman had slighted him of the same opportunity, 4 or 5 years prior. And Thurman has now said that he believes that Spence has always been avoiding him, that he doesn't want that fight. It's just the classic boxing politics that continue to plague the game and continue to keep us from what would be a humongous fight. I mean, even at their older ages, even with their shortcomings of Thurman's injuries and whatnot, and Spence's huge loss to Crawford, this would still be a mega fight, because these two fighters are still world-class boxers in their own right. I mean, you have a guy like Keith Thurman who came through the ranks around, the early to mid 2010s. He was able to get on some big-time cards, such as, some Floyd Mayweather, Oscar De La Hoya cards early on the undercard. He was able to work his way up. He was the WBA interim champion, while Floyd Mayweather was the WBA undisputed champion for that time. He was kind of boxing his way through, waiting for that title to either be vacated or for him to be able to get a title shot. He called out guys like Mayweather and Pacquiao earlier in his career. Both of those guys declined to fight him because obviously he was a younger guy, a lot lesser of a name, so it would have been a big-time risk to go ahead and go against him. And then once Mayweather ended up retiring following his fight with Andre Berto, Thurman automatically was able to be lifted into that WBA spot. I think that he earned the title after beating Robert Guerrero, and what was an incredible, once again, just an outclassed boxing performance by him. And then through that, like I said, was able to put on some classic fights with the likes of guys like Sean Porter, Danny Garcia, some big-time, beefs and some great press conferences with those guys. Then, suffered an injury, was able to come back against Jose Cito Lopez, and then put on a big time event with Manny Pacquiao, new era versus old era, and unfortunately did suffer the loss against Manny, but now has been trying his best to make a comeback, outclass Mario Barrios in 2022, has been dealing with some injury, and then just beat Brock Jarvis like we previously mentioned. And Spence, kind of a similar thing, kind of was just coming through the ranks, trying his best to find any fight that he realistically could. Finally got his big break after his 21st victory when he went to Sheffield, England to fight against Kell Brook for the IBF welterweight title. Absolutely outclassed Kell Brook, beat him by knockout. Had a couple of retains after that against guys like Lamont Peterson, Carlos Ocampo. You had then his big-time fight with Mikey Garcia following that, where a lot of people thought that Spence wouldn't be able to box with Mikey Garcia, even though Garcia was coming down from a smaller weight class. Absolutely dominated Garcia in a dominating fashion to retain that IBF belt. Then began on a spree to kind of just unify, those titles and try to become undisputed. Beat Sean Porter for the WBC welterweight title. Beat Yordenis Ugas in 2022 for the WBA title. And then, of course, the big-time fight that came in when he got outmatched against Terrence Crawford for the undisputed title. And since then, because of some certain injuries that he's had because of the devastating car crash that he had, in late 2019, early 2020. It's kind of derailed him a bit. And that was the unfortunate thing with Spence is after that came to happen, it seemed like, his dominating performances kind of got to go downhill. I mean, he fought well against Garcia and Ugas, but it didn't seem like his punches had the same pop. And it did seem at times like he was having trouble with taking counters, more than he was earlier in his career. And people forget that Spence was the name at welterweight. Terrence Crawford obviously was seen as a special fighter, but Spence was at the top of that division. And there were talks, we see Crawford going up against Canelo right now. There were talks about Spence potentially going off and facing against Canelo at the time when Canelo was around 161 pounds to 168. There was talks about Spence jumping up 1 or 2 weight divisions to go ahead and face off Canelo in a big-time super fight. He was Terrence Crawford before Terrence Crawford ended up beating him and taking that name. And one of the reasons why Terrence Crawford is one of the biggest names in boxing right now is because of that great performance against a fellow pound-for-pound great in Errol Spence Jr. And so these two coming together, Thurman and Spence, not only would the press conferences be amazing because these two are incredible talkers, they're always jabbing at each other, especially Thurman, but I think that the fight would be exceptional. I mean, you would have the taller, longer Spence, obviously, being a little bit rangy, trying to work behind his jab and popping up some solid straight rights behind there. And then you would have Keith Thurman working within the outside, using his exceptional speed, being able to get onto the inside to hit Spence to the body, being able to counter up top with some right hands to the top. It would be an absolute war. We know that these two love to go to war. I've already mentioned so many of those fights, and I'm going to repeat myself again, but Thurman versus Porter was a war. When you look at Spence Porter, when you look at Spence Ugas, when you look at Spence Crawford, all of those big-time fights that all of these guys were involved in, Thurman Pacquiao, all of these fights were huge, huge wars between the two where they were just going back and forth, absorbing and throwing blows. These two are two of the most entertaining welterweights on the planet. And now what would be even better for the both of these two is now that now they are at 154, because Spence has been talking about his comeback being at 154. Actually, not to go off topic, Spence was supposed to be the one who was fighting Sebastian Fundora at the beginning of the year. The fight that Thurman got for October 25th was actually originally supposed to be Spence, but I believe that they couldn't come to an agreement with, I believe it was for, like, PBC had a little bit of an issue with the marketing or something like that, and they couldn't secure a venue, and so Fundora ended up going off and exploring other contenders. But Spence was supposed to fight Fundora in March of 2025 for his comeback fight. So we know that these two are looking to go around the same level. We know that they are now both at the 154-pound division, which is going to make both of them healthier. It's going to allow their shots to be a lot more powerful. It's going to make them look quicker because Spence at 147, especially in those last couple of fights against Ugas and especially against Crawford, he looked very, very drained. He looked very unhealthy, very, very thin. It was clear that the weight cut was having a huge, huge effect on him. So adding that extra 7 pounds on is going to make a big, big time difference. And Thurman, he's had those thudding blows since 147, 154. I don't think that it will be any different. He will be a hard, hard puncher at 154, and these two will just go to blows. Who would I realistically favor in that fight? I mean, if Thurman is able to beat Fundora, and if he continues to stay active until that fight ends up getting made, then I would personally favor Thurman just because of the activity and because Spence has not shown the same grit that he did before, previous to the unfortunate car crash that he had. His face does not seem like it's being able to stand up to counters very well. I mean, Crawford was able to hurt him so easily whenever he wanted in that fight. And once again, that was Crawford at 147 pounds. So could you imagine Keith Thurman at 154? But, I just think that it would be a great fight. And I think that right now it's one of the biggest missed mega fights in the new era of welterweights, like I mentioned. But it's also, I think, one of the most overlooked fights because I don't think that people really realize that not only are these two now in the same weight division, once again at 154, but they are looking to fight the same opponents. They're at around the same level. And they're both at the point in their careers where they need not only one last payday, but one last big fight and one last fight to really solidify both of their legacies to see who can topple in that new era. I mean, of course, Terrence Crawford is going to end up being at the top of that pyramid. But after that, I mean, Errol Spence, Keith Thurman, they're kind of in a firefight for who can take that second place spot of this new era of welterweights. It would be a fun, entertaining fight, some fun, entertaining press conferences. And overall, I just think that it is one of the fights that needs to be made in boxing right now before these two end up retiring. But first, Thurman has a tall order. He needs to get past Fundora. But honestly, I think that even if he loses to Fundora, you can still make this fight. I mean, it's not like a Fundora loss is going to completely derail his career. Spence making a comeback fight. Do you really want to put him in a championship fight off of a comeback fight against Fundora, who just dismantled Keith Thurman, if he ends up doing that? Probably not. So even if Thurman loses, I definitely think that you can still continue to make this fight. But let me know what you think about that down below in the comment section. What do you think about this hypothetical matchup between Keith Thurman and Errol Spence? How big do you think that it could be? Who do you think that it would benefit the most? Who do you think would win? And what do you think is going to happen on October 25th between Sebastian Fundora and Keith Thurman? It's going to be one entertaining night. I want to encourage you guys to go down below, like the video, answer all of those questions down below in the comments, as well as subscribing, sharing with your friends. And if you haven't already, go ahead and follow us on all social medias, that being TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. All of those apps are going to be down below. We're on all those social medias. You'll get to see my latest reaction to breaking news within the NBA, the NFL, and combat sports. And you will never miss whenever the podcast decides to upload an episode. And without further ado, guys, that's all that I have for you guys today. I will see you guys on the next one. Have a great rest of your weekend, and peace.